What's up, y'all? Welcome back. I'm Tobias. The show's called Mindflower, where I bring you the weekly astrology forecast. Filming this on April 27th. We just had that new moon in Taurus this afternoon. This is significant because we are laying the foundation for not only this lunar cycle, but with this fixed cross, right? With this full moon taking place, with the new moon taking place in Taurus, square to Mars in Leo, that's opposite Pluto in Aquarius. And of course, Black Moon Lilith is opposing in Scorpio. That means we're sitting on all the fixed signs, having powerful energies in them. And again, we are entering into a new world with these new outer planets that are all moving into different signs this year. Neptune has already made its transition. Pluto's already made its transition. Of course, Saturn and Neptune, Saturn's going to be next to come into Aries, right? Then later we'll have Uranus coming into Gemini later this year. And of course, there's still going to be retrograde seasons, so we're not done with Uranus and Taurus, and we're not done with Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, but we are done with Pluto and Capricorn. And of course, that Pluto-Sun conjunction that took place on Inauguration Day, the 21st, really kicked off this new world in a big way. Now, it's interesting because astrologers talk about the age of Aquarius, and the transition between the ages and the precessions of the equinox. The paleontologists, right, talk about like the Holocene and the Anthropocene. And so it's, different angles, different studies. Everybody's saying the same thing, right, as we are transitioning into a new world, a new environment. And a lot of stuff, moving forward is not going to be the way that it used to be. So as we lay the foundation, in this lunar cycle, right, the important thing to realize is, once again, we've had so many crazy retrogrades this year. I talked a lot about that in last week's horoscope, about all the pressure on the new beginnings. And we are finally here, right, to the new beginning. And we're ready to start painting our masterpiece, and building, building the structures of the rest of our lives, right? So the new moon seeds the cycle, and the full moon is the culmination of the cycle, right? So the first half is the growth, the second half is the decay and the death. And right now we're pushing towards the first quarter square. Now, the first half of the first hemicycle goes from the new moon, right, or the conjunction, right, for any two planets or two energies, to that first 90-degree angle. And of course, that first 90 degrees is all about being pushed forward by the momentum. So everything that we learned about ourselves, about our thought process, about our relationships and our values and the way we value ourselves and our dreams and our identity and like our courage and the way that we show up to stuff, all of that's been under such an intense microscope, all this year, and particularly since January, the January 21st, that's all the juice, the motivation, the pressure that's pushing us into this cycle. And so we think ahead, right? We're going to be having a full moon in Scorpio that's opposite Uranus in Taurus in 2 weeks. Now, we've had a lot of these, right? Because Uranus has been in Taurus for 7 years. So Uranus brings the surprises. And of course, this time Uranus is very, very close to Algol. Algol is the demon star, right? So there's a lot that can still go wrong. But ultimately, the surprises maybe of the Uranus and Taurus shouldn't be so surprising necessarily, because, we've already had plenty of time to try and get used to that energy. So even though Uranus is still that totally unpredictable vibe, so it's like, you still can't really know for sure what's going to happen, because it's always the thing that you are not expecting or didn't even think of. Once again, though, we still have had plenty of time to transform our Taurus energy and the way that we value and relate to our own, inner worth. So this week, right, as the moon finishes in Taurus, she's going to conjunct Uranus and conjunct Algol. So I think at that point, we're going to get like the rest of the downloads, the rest of the information. Like I said, there's going to be like another shoe that drops, about all the things that have happened earlier this winter and into the spring. And then on Tuesday, right, I'm going to read the transits off here. Oh yeah, because that's the thing. Okay, so the moon going to conjunct Uranus on Monday. And then she's also going to get the sextile to Venus and Saturn at the end of Pisces, right? So that's a really beautiful aspect from the end of Taurus to the end of Pisces, really grounding out that creative energy, grounding out those spiritual lessons, that we've received from Saturn, trying to help Venus ultimately mature, right? Saturn has a lot to do with maturity and integrity, and mature towards our deepest spiritual worth, and the purpose that we have. So again, I think Monday is going to be a grounding day. There are going to be some surprises, but we have that opportunity again to connect with the transformation of Uranus and to connect with the lessons of Saturn and Venus and really internalize those. Tuesday, right? But as soon as the moon comes into Gemini, again, I think Tuesday is going to lighten up as well, because when the moon comes into Gemini, she's going to make the trine to Pluto in Aquarius, and again, that's like a harmonious aspect, that's air to air. So again, getting that support from the evolutionary intention, the evolutionary purpose. And of course, she makes the sextile from Gemini back to Aries. So again, Tuesdays, again, the energies are more supportive, right? It's helping us start to understand intellectually how we're going to be able to move forward. And of course, on Wednesday, when the moon conjuncts Jupiter, that's when Venus comes into Aries, right? So, as the moon's going to finish in Gemini too, she'll get the sextile to Chiron. Again, it's like this emotional understanding about where we've been and where we're going and everything. And, with the conjunction of Jupiter, it's like, Jupiter and the moon get along really well, typically, right? I mean, the Jupiter's exalted in Cancer, which is the sign that's ruled by the moon. And of course, Jupiter is Zeus, who was saved by mommy from evil Saturn and was helped by her to overthrow, so he's her favorite son. But in Gemini, he's far from home, right? So you think about the moon's like, moving through Gemini and getting the support from Pluto and starting to finally understand maybe, or get the first look at trying to actually be able to like have our mental monkey mind, kind of begin to integrate all this new energy that's coming into Aries. And then, hoping for a map, like coming up with Jupiter being like, yo, Jupiter, you got the map, like you got the facts, you got the ways to move forward. Cause that's what Gemini is all about, right? Is the immediate environment and the collection of information, and our ability to move forward. But of course, Jupiter is at detriment in Gemini, right? Cause it rules, it's dignified in Sagittarius. So Jupiter's as far away from his home as he can be, so he's kind of like, I think it's, we're going to get a little bit of that understanding. But it's also kind of that thing where Jupiter's like, I don't fucking know. Like, I'm way far away from home. Like, I'm surrounded by all this information, but like, I just went through this crazy journey, through Capricorn and Aquarius and Pisces and Aries and Taurus. And now I'm just like, it's like when you go on like an international journey and like, there's a lot of, beautiful lessons and like experiences. But if you stay out long enough, eventually you just kind of end up where the point where you're like, where the fuck am I? And that's kind of where Jupiter's at right now, where it's like, okay, like, but he's still got some stuff for the moon, and so I think that, again, Tuesday is going to be a little bit lighter of an energy as we start to be able to understand, some of these intense lessons that have come. But of course, with Venus coming into Aries, I think there's also going to be, kind of a frustration, Venus in Aries is kind of an angry sort of an energy, and she's still going to be behind Neptune. And like, they both, like, Neptune rules Pisces, Venus is exalted in Pisces. Venus and Neptune get along really well together, but neither one of them is that stoked about Aries, and so she's still wanting to connect with Neptune, but like will still be behind, because by the time she hits 0, Neptune will have hit 1. And so, it's one of those moments where we're gonna be feeling the intensity and feeling the frustration of like trying to get the new stuff off the ground. And maybe Jupiter's gonna help us out a little bit, but probably not as much as we would like, right? So then on Thursday, that's when the moon's gonna square Uranus, right? So when the moon comes into Cancer, this is the thing though, right? This is the thing to understand about like having Pluto gonna be in Aquarius for the next 16 years, and Neptune gonna be in Aries for 10 plus. I don't know if it's like 13 or 12 or 15, something like that. Like not quite as long as Pluto, but still quite a while, like more than 10 years. So every time the moon travels through Cancer, for the next 15 years, she's gonna quincunx Pluto and she's gonna square Neptune, and those are, so that's why it's like the comfortable, nurturing energy of Cancer that we want, is just not necessarily going to be available, because Pluto's always going to be there, to be like, oh, like you really shouldn't be chilling out right now. You're not going to be nurtured by just relaxing. That's actually going to draw, the energies towards you that you don't want. And of course, with the Neptune and Aries, like it's just going to be confusing about like, how come I can't like take a load off? How come there's no sensitivity left in the world? There's no nurturing energies. And so we're really going to feel that, I think. And of course, the moon's also going to be squaring Venus, right, as she moves through Cancer and everything. So yeah, it'll be interesting to feel that, it's again, like the early part of this week, I think is going to be the smoother, better, easier part, where we're getting the grounding and we're getting the downloads and we're starting to come to terms mentally with everything that's happened. We're starting to be able to integrate everything that's happening. But again, like, what does that lead to? It leads to like, the moon in Cancer, a complicated emotional state, as we realize, holy shit, like what the fuck just happened? And this is how it fits into my life. And like, this is the foundation that I'm supposed to be laying. And this is how I'm supposed to be moving forward. And the answer is yes, right? This is how you're supposed to be moving forward, right? Because ultimately, by the time we hit next weekend, then the moon's going to be coming into Leo, right, and conjuncting Mars, and opposing Pluto, and that's going to be like, again, the fire is going to be really intense, right? It's going to make the trine when she comes into Leo to the Neptune in Aries and the Venus in Aries, and that fire energy is going to be really, really strong. So so there's the potential for a lot of frustration. There's a potential also for a lot of creative power, because again, I can't stress it enough. We're laying the foundation, and the foundation we lay is the foundation that we'll be able to build upon. And so it's important to approach this week, with that awareness, right, of our path, and keeping everything in perspective as the surprises come up, as the disappointments come up, as the frustrations come up, and all the things that are associated with starting a new project. But again, like Chiron has been teaching us how to be able to manage that and how to be able to handle that, so that we can show up to this new beginning in the best way possible. Let's see. Yeah, so this is what I'm going to be doing too. Just moving forward, right? I'll be a week ahead with the weeklies. So, I'm filming this on the new moon, but it's a forecast for everything that's going to take us through the first quarter square. And on the first quarter square, I'll be filming that like full moon horoscope, right? To get us, all the way to the full moon, right? So, and then so on and so forth all the way around. I'll still be on TikTok and Instagram, like every day on my stories with the daily card pulls and everything. A lot of this is to keep myself in the rhythm, because ultimately I need it really badly, and I know that if I need it and I can benefit from it, then there's some people out there that might be able to benefit from it too, right? When you talk about staying in the rhythm, it's easiest to start with the moon, right? Astrology can get really complicated. That there's a lot of different material out there, but like it's actually really simple. It's about syncing up with the rhythm, and in order to sync up with the rhythm, just start by syncing up with the moon, because that's what people feel the most, and that's the 28-day cycle that gets us from month to month, from new moon to full moon and back to new moon and everything. And so, the thing to think about in this cycle, again, as we are 1/4 of the way through the Pluto Sun cycle, which means that we are now taking the motivation of the pressure and, the fuel that we've gathered from everything that's happened since January, in order to start to drive our own process towards, 3 months from now, 4 months from now, we're going to have that sun opposing Pluto, right? The culmination of like this year's work, as it pertains to our evolutionary cycle and our evolutionary process. And it's significant because like this full moon for this lunar cycle, right? Because it's cycles and cycles, right? It's wheels and wheels and wheels, right? And that's how astrology is, and that's how the cosmos are, and that's how nature is. And so the full moon in Scorpio, opposite Uranus, is all about the magnetic power that Scorpio has to attract the things it needs and it desires to it, right? Scorpio is like that on-off energy, right? It's either like come here or go away. Like either we are like magnetically attracted, we are magnetically repelled. And so what we're trying to do, is lay the foundations, based upon everything we've learned from Saturn and Venus and Neptune, at the end of Pisces and the North Node there and everything, and everything we've learned from Chiron and Uranus that I went so on and on about, in the last horoscope, and to put that all together to be able to draw towards us, the most harmonious future that is aligned with like our truest path that we're trying to walk and everything. And again, like the South Node in Virgo, right? The nodal axis, the South Node is like the past and the present, and so we are going to be living in a Virgo reality where it's going to be important to like be on point, and yet being too stuck to the like agenda is going to sink people, right? That's the whole weird lesson. We learn karmic lessons about the North Node by experiencing the South Node energy. And so like the North Node in Pisces and the South Node in Virgo is all about like, learning how to let go a little bit, while still, while not fully like, train wrecking, right? It's letting go of the obsessions a little bit. Like South Node and Virgo is like whatever is bothering you that you're obsessing over, like the little details, like you just need to get the fuck over it, and again, like we're gonna have to be organized, we're gonna have to be detailed and be on point, and yet like thinking that somehow following the rules, and following the recipe and just doing what we're told, and ultimately like Virgo's thing is they need to dream bigger, right? Virgo stays stuck, in in the details, in the minutia, and Pisces dreams, Pisces dreams big. So we need to dream our biggest dream, and lean into it and make it a reality. And it all begins this week, right? So have a great week, fam. And we'll be talking soon. Peace.